Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this journey. This is the very first episode of the Thinking Jew podcast, where our goal is to dive deep into Torah and Jewish philosophy and really uncover new layers of depth and understanding that we never realized were there before. I'm your host, Rabbi Moshe Siegel. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions, comments, or topic suggestions. I'll try my best to answer any email that comes in. My email address is thethinkingjewpodcast@gmail.com. I know it's kind of long, but figured that it'd be a nice, easy way to remember. So today I want to take a deeper look at this week's Torah portion. It's called Vayechi, and it's actually the last Torah portion in the book of Genesis. So where we're standing here is all of the Jews have already descended down to Egypt. This is before the slavery begins. Jacob, the third of our patriarchs, is 147 years old, and he's on his deathbed. He wants the opportunity to bless his children one last time before he passes. So he calls for all of his children, the 12 tribes, his 12 sons, all living in Egypt now, to join him on his deathbed. Now I want to read how the Torah describes Jacob's invitations to his children. And I think we'll really see from here a setup, or maybe even a backdrop, for the whole ensuing chapters of the blessings. And we'll come out with even a very practical lesson for all of us today at the end of 2020. So here are the first two verses. This is chapter 49 in Genesis, verse 1 and 2. And Jacob called to his sons, and he said, "Gather together, and I will tell you what will happen in the end of days. Convene and listen, sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father." So the question I want to discuss is, why does the Torah repeat the same thing twice? It says that they should gather together. In both verse 1 and 2, we know the Torah is very precise and particular with the words. It uses no wasted words in the Torah. Why does it seem to say the exact same thing twice? Now, to really understand and appreciate the difference and the answer to this question, we have to look at the Hebrew text to see what is the nuance of distinction between these two words for gathering. So in verse 1, when he calls his sons, he says, "Hey asafu," from the root of asaf, to gather in. In the second verse, it says the word hikavetzu, which also means to gather in, from the word kavat, or we know more famously from a kibbutz. Once we understand the nuance and difference between these two words, I think we'll get really a whole deeper perspective on what Jacob was doing here with the blessings. And also, like it says in verse 1, "Gather together and I will tell you what will happen in the end of days." Perhaps this is also the key to helping us ourselves today get towards the end of days and bring Mashiach. So the way to always find a distinction in two synonyms in Hebrew is to always look in other verses in the Torah and try to see where does the Torah use this word in a way that it only could have used one and not the other one, in a way that's unique, that we can really see something about this word and try to find a common ground understanding to distinguish between the two words. So Rav Hirsch points out that if you look in Numbers 12:15, we find that the word he'asfu, or the word asaf, to gather in, can be used by an individual. It's not just a multitude of parts coming together and uniting, but even an individual. We find there it's talking about that Miriam was punished with leprosy after speaking Lashon Hara against her brother Moses. And the Torah says, "And the nation didn't travel until Asaf Miriam," until Miriam was gathered in. Now, what the word gathered in here means, it means not that multiple things came together, it means that Miriam was outside the camp, and until she returned to the camp, they didn't travel. So Rav Hirsch explains, we see that the word asaf, it doesn't just mean a joining together of different pieces, but rather it's used by an individual to mean gathering yourself in from a place where you don't belong, somewhere that you're not supposed to be, and returning and reconnecting to a place where you do belong. Inherent in this definition is that you're cutting yourself off, you're separating yourself from somewhere, from point A, and reconnecting, reattaching to B. So you're gathering yourself in to be attached to something. This is true even on an individual level. The other word, hikavtzu, from the root of kavat, which also means to gather in, that we only find regarding multiple entities coming together and uniting, joining together. That's more of an external expression of uniting, rather than the he'asef, which is more of the internal finding yourself and going to the place you're supposed to go to. So Rav Hirsch explains a beautiful idea, and he says as follows, that what Jacob was really telling his sons was he was saying, "Gather together, my sons. On an individual level, each one of you leave your place of individuality, leave your place of egoism, leave your place of self-centeredness, and reconnect to the greater mission. Each one of you have unique talents and unique aspects of yourself that you bring to the table. Don't just use that isolated for yourself. Gather in yourself and reconnect yourself to the greater community, to the greater goal of bringing Hashem into the world. Remember, Jacob is about to express to each of his sons their personal strengths and weaknesses, the areas they have to grow in life, and how they can become the greatest people they can, to maximize their potential in the greatest way. And he's warning them in the beginning that there's a tremendous pitfall in this. The more you gain self-awareness, the more you're at risk of becoming self-centered, of recognizing all these unbelievable strengths you have and using them for your own personal gains. So the introduction that Jacob tells when he's gathering his sons together is twofold. One aspect he's saying is, physically, guys, come together. He come to, everyone get together, meet me at location A, at my bed, in whatever time, in 1 hour. But the more important thing he's saying is, hey, asfu, which means as you're coming to my bed, as you're approach this through the lens of uniting in a common mission, in uniting in a common goal. Break away, separate yourself from the areas of yourself that are self-centered, and join together in this common mission, the role that the Jewish nation is about to take at the passing of Jacob. After this, Jacob goes through each of the 12 tribes and expresses to them their strengths, their weaknesses, where they have the most potential to benefit the world and to create really this unique reality that is the Jewish nation. And what's interesting is that if you look at the end of the blessings, kind of the final thing he says to them, after individually blessing them, he seems to repeat this same theme he started with again in a different way. Listen to this verse, a very strange verse. This is verse 28. It says, and this is what their father said to them, and he blessed them, each man with his appropriate blessing, he blessed them. And there's a back and forth changing here in tense in Hebrew between the plural and the singular. Specifically at the end, it says, each man with his appropriate blessing, he blessed them. Doesn't seem to make sense. Rashi points out, it should say, each one, when he gave him the appropriate blessing, he blessed him. Why does it say he blessed them? So I believe the message that Jacob was telling them is the same way he started. And the message is as follows. Take Judah, for example. He blesses Judah. He points out, Judah, you have the strength of a lion. Once Judah recognizes that he has the strength of a lion, this is what's inside of him and what he is able to express to the world, Jacob's reminding him, this isn't meant just for yourself. Don't use your power to subdue everybody else around you, but use this as a tool for the greater good of all the children of Jacob, of the whole Jewish nation. Know yourself, know your greatness, know your power, but then go ahead and don't use it just for your own personal gains. Use it for everyone. If you do that, then each individual blessing is actually a blessing for everyone. Because when you have so many of these different talents going on, each person in their individual way, and everyone is using their talents not for themselves, not for their personal gain, but for the greater community, for everyone else, then there's this beautiful blending of so many different aspects of self, so many different aspects and attributes and greatnesses, that the whole is so much greater than the individual. So as Jacob gives each individual his individual blessing, he blessed them, and he blessed the Jewish nation with having each of these aspects inside of them. And that's the same message which is, remember, your goal here is to bring Hashem into the world. Your goal here is to fulfill God's mission in the world. Recognize where you can enter into that. Recognize where your strength lies in that, and then use it for the greater mission. Don't use it for your own self and for your own self-centered purposes. When you do that, it's truly ish kivir chaso beirachosam. Each one's appropriate blessing becomes a blessing for the masses. I want to end with the following thought here, which is that in the first verse we quoted in the beginning, chapter 49, verse 1, Jacob said as follows, and Jacob called to his sons and he said, gather together and I will tell you what will happen in the end of days. And the question is, we don't find anywhere that he actually tells them what happens in the end of days. So why does he mention he's going to tell them something that he never says? The Midrash explains that he actually did give them the answer. And the first part of the verse where he said, Asaf, gather together, leave your individual self-centeredness and join together on the greater mission, that actually is the answer to how to get to the end of days. What's the key to bringing Mashiach? What's the key to getting the world to the next stage where God expresses himself in a greater capacity in our world? It's having the self-awareness to know what I excel at, what I'm good at, what I can offer the world, and then having the humility to not just take that and use it for my own self-serving purposes, but rather for the greater good. I think the practical message of this week's parsha is it's so important for us to look at ourselves and recognize what are our strengths, what can we do for the world, where do we excel at? And once we're empowered with that knowledge, take those skills, take that knowledge and go use them for the greater good. Go use them for this united mission of bringing God into the world in the greatest way possible. We're standing now at the way end of 2020, looking into 2021. Although it's not the Jewish calendar, it's always a good time to be thinking about how to improve, what we can get better at. I think this is really part of the message. Look into ourselves, know what we can do, and then try to figure out how can I use my skill set to develop the world in a greater way, to help my friends, to help my community. I think that's the message Jacob was telling his children. I think that's the message that's important for us to think about as we finish this year and begin the next year. I want to thank you so much for listening to this first episode of the Thinking Jew podcast. If you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button. I'll keep uploading more episodes. I'm hoping to do it once a week. And if you have any questions, as I mentioned earlier, you can always shoot me an email, thethinkingjewpodcast@gmail.com. Stay tuned for more interesting insights into Torah and Jewish thought, and have an awesome